Awesome. All right. Perfect. All right. So thank you so much, guys, for making time for this. Let me give you a quick introduction. My name is Adil Singh. I'm the co-founder and experience designer at Lightsout, and I happen to have varied interest in various fields, right from astrophysics to Formula One to architecture, spatial design. So all the geeks out there, you can hit me up if you want to chat up around any of these topics for sure. I'll be game. Here's a little quick introduction about our creative studio. So we're a nuanced boutique studio, and we focus on these three pillars, right from design and experience to brand management and digital transformation for B2C and B2B organizations. But enough about me. Let's start. So the topic of discussion is experience design, and this is what you'll learn out of it. We will learn designing experiences for you and me, basically for people and humans, and most importantly, how not to screw up your MVP. To give you a little context, the areas that we'll be covering is how to develop a design mindset in the first place, wiring narrative in design, product design, or platforms that you're building, certain principles and some blind spots, lessons that I have learned in my experience the hard way. So let's start with the most important question. Why experience design and not product design? The answer is magic. Let me tell you about a story. It's me in the story. This is back in 2019, July. I had a pretty rough day, and I was pretty bummed out during the night. And I turned to this application, which was actually recommended to me by my friend, which happens to help you with guided meditation and also help you get a good sleep. So I turned this on, put on my earplugs, and I drifted off to sleep for sure. But I was still going through a troubled sleep. So quite naturally, I woke up in the middle of the night. I turned towards my phone, and there it was. Magic happened to me. And it happened in a very, very small way through this application. The first thing that I see once I reopened my phone is this message. And it says, having trouble getting sleep, let's help you drift off again. So this little piece of communication that I stumbled on really connected with me. It felt like there's someone looking out for me. There's this person behind this interface who's trying to connect with me, trying to look out, trying to care. And this small message actually stuck with me, and I immediately fell in love with the product. And ever since, I think it's been 1.5 years, I've been an avid Headspace user just because of that magical experience that I had with the product. So the reason I'm telling you about this story is just to help you understand how massive the impact can be if you design the experience well through your platform. And to those who are wondering if I got the sleep or not, no, I didn't. I had a pretty groggy day the next day. But nevertheless, moving on, back to the same question. Why experience design and not product design? The answer is pretty simple. Because you're designing for someone who's getting late for the airport, someone who's ordering a cake for his first anniversary, an excited dad who wants to give his son the best surprise ever. It could be a nervous mom who's traveling across the country to meet her children, an obese kid trying all her will to get back in shape, and for me who's having a troubled sleep. You're designing for all of these guys, and all of us are humans. And we come in various shapes, sizes, color, ethnicity, mindset, problems, countries, and the list goes on. And the one common thread that binds it all together is emotions. So you're basically designing for emotions, to evoke emotion and to transform your audience and your users. So going back to the same scenario, if you could look at these scenarios, we're talking emotions, right? Someone's getting late, someone's waiting for their first anniversary, the dad is excited, mom is nervous, the kid is trying all her will to get back in shape, and there's someone who's having a trouble sleep, who's frustrated, who's annoyed. You're designing for these guys. And the good news is you don't really have to be a graphic designer to design experiences. All you need is compassion and a bit of imagination, for sure. And that definitely makes developing a design mindset absolutely important, which is what we'll be talking about. And to develop a design mindset, these are the core concepts that we definitely need to absorb and understand. Let me start with the first one, that's compassion over empathy. So when I say empathy, it's definitely a buzzword in the market, isn't it? As soon as you hear empathy, these are the things that comes to your mind. It's design thinking, human-centered design. You're expected to feel what someone else is feeling. You're expected to crawl into users' minds, understand heart and soul of your users. But I hate to break it to you, it's absolutely impossible. It's not possible to understand the totality of the user's experience. And a lot of people say it's always going to be a second-hand comparative understanding. Just to give you another example, a non-Black person cannot really feel the pain of a Black person. They can only sympathize or be more compassionate. And better yet, we're actually psychologically wired to empathize with people who are similar to us. There's this thing called tribal mentality, which has been there since we were monkeys. And tribal mentality essentially helps us look out for people in our own community. And it's basically a survival skill set that we have developed over the time. But as a designer, we're not really creating products and solutions for only our kind of people. You're actually designing for people like us and also many more who are not like us. And therefore, compassion is so important. What compassion does is it actually allows you to take action. Just to give you an example, what do you do when you see someone who spills coffee on themselves? Your first reaction is definitely to provide help, right? And you're able to do that because of just one thing that connects you to that stranger, and that's trust. You're basically trusting that person's pain that the person is going through, and basically you get an instinct to help them out. The compassion allows us to trust their anger or pain without taking it on ourselves, which is actually very possible. So you just have to trust your users' pain and anger and things that they're going through and design around it. And therefore, this is something that I really believe in, that you should design with compassion, and empathy is overrated for sure. Now let's talk about the next concept, which is the complex relationship between designers and engineers. I'm not sure how many designers or engineers do you have in your teams, but it's definitely a very complex relationship between them. But there is a common binding agent between both of these profiles, which can help them stick together. Even if you're a team of 3 people or 4 people or even 2 people, one is a designer, one has an engineer mindset, both of y'all would always be at loggerheads. If not right now, you will definitely face this problem once you scale up. This thing is just inevitable and every company faces it. So how do you solve that? So let's take this example where we have a designer on the left and an engineer on the right. Of course, designer is more compassionate, engineers are analytical, designers are gut-driven more often than not, engineers are process-driven, designers are right-brained, engineers are left-brained. But there is this one common thread that actually binds, that acts as a binding agent between these two nucleus, and that's data. And that's why you should always design with data, and not your intuition every time. There's this absolutely amazing book called Designing with Data by Rochelle King, who's the Spotify design head, and I highly recommend you all read that book. So what's happening here is data plays a very crucial role here between the relationships that you have within your team. Data becomes a common playground for both designers and engineers. So what we have over here is designers treat data as a medium through which their users are talking to them, because it's absolutely impossible for designers to really interact one-on-one with their users. It could be tens of thousands of users that they're designing for via a product, and it's just impossible to have conversations one-on-one and really empathize with them. And therefore, designers can look at developing this relationship with data, which comes more from deriving compassion from data with their users. And of course, engineers already love data, and that's like the ultimate truth if deciphered accurately. And this is where we're able to really match these profiles together so that they can work towards the organization's success and not be at loggerheads all the time. And which is why I always recommend people to gather data from the get-go. It doesn't matter if you have one user or 10 users or 15 users or 15 million users. You will always get amazing, interesting data points, which will essentially tell you how your users are actually interacting, behaving with your product features, how are different triggers are actually triggering your users in a way that you had never imagined. And it could also help you to understand what are the different ways your products can be used by the users or interacted with. There are some amazing data analytics platforms which gives you a lot of free sessions or usage or trial periods that you can definitely use, right from heap analytics to mixed panel full story. These are some amazing data gathering tool. I do have an example from one of our projects. An interesting data point that we got from it was there's this platform which essentially is used by the users to order cakes. And the screenshot that you see over here is actually one of the stages in the ordering process where you're supposed to enter your address. And to just be more specific, in case the system is not able to understand your address, you need to move the pin on the map to adjust the area that the system needs to serve. But to our surprise, there was this text on the bottom of the same window which reads out, let me just help you with this. It reads out, hold and drag map pin to adjust location, right? And if you understand, this little piece of information is actually in a text format, and I'm actually asking people to move the pin on the map and interact with the map and not the text. But to our surprise, what was happening was people were literally trying to drag this text icon, the pin, onto the map rather than interacting with the map. And of course, this was a very, very new product, and this small piece of information was actually one of the biggest reasons for the bounce rates and people falling off the platform. And we were able to understand this interaction, understand this trigger that the users were having by using a data analytics tool. So it definitely helps you understand various different interactions, various different triggers that are happening on the platform that you wouldn't even imagine that's happening. So basically what I'm trying to say is, what you think is obvious, designers and engineers might just think this particular feature or this particular information is quite obvious, where it turns out that it's not quite obvious for majority of your users. And that's exactly where data analytics or understanding how your product is being used comes into the picture. Next up is one of the very interesting topics, and companies usually miss this out, where organizations should always go for needs over problems. You would always be faced with a lot of problems that the users are facing, but you need to really dig deeper and really understand what is the source of those problems. You need to deeply understand the needs of your users or your target segment, and not just the problems that they're talking to you about. They will never, in most of the cases, they will never know the needs. They will always tell you about the problems. And it's your job as a designer, as an engineer, to really dig deeper and get to the need, the fundamental need that you're trying to solve, or that you're supposed to solve, or your solution or platform needs to solve. Because you can always create a feature to solve a problem, but if you're really wanting to disrupt your industry, if you focus on an unmet user need that even your users don't know about, you will be able to disrupt your industry. The chances are higher, at least. For example, Uber, it's a very direct example. What it does is it doesn't just help you commute from point A to point B, but it actually is trying to buy you more time. And that's magical, right? Imagine using a product which just gives you back your time, and everyone needs that. And which is why Uber has been able to become such a large part in our lives, and we depend on it. Which leads me to a quick quiz session that we have for you all. So we have a before and an after screen of Uber's UI. I just need you guys to tell me one fundamental shift that you see from the before screen to the after screen. I guess you have just 30 seconds. Maybe you can just drop in text in the chat window and I'll take a look. All right, 30 seconds are up. Cool. Amazing, guys. Some really interesting answers. All right, so before we get to the answer, let's look at various scenarios where you could be using Uber, right? You could be coming out of a mall, you could be getting late for airport, going for a meeting across town, coming from a dinner date, urgent visit to a hospital, or going to a vet. In all of these scenarios, you would imagine there's a level of urgency, there's a level of emergency. There are certain scenarios where you just have one finger of your one hand to control the application because you have all those shopping bags. You've got a laptop bag in your hand, so you can't really use both of your hands. And of course, if you're visiting hospital, it's a case of emergency. So you don't really have time to fiddle around on the application. And that's what Uber realized. They realized that every single time, or most of their users are going to be using the platform on the go. And that's how they have to wire their UI and the entire experience around it. And once you're working on a platform which is on the go, you basically prioritize only two things. One is destination, exactly where you want to be, and one-hand usage, because of the scenarios that we just discussed, which is absolutely, absolutely important. And that's exactly what they did. They removed all the clutter from the previous UI. The first thing that they focused on the destination, and they did give you quick access to some of your favorite locations or some of your most visited locations. And the second most important thing that they did was they kept all of these important stuff within one thumb reach. And that's exactly what the fundamental shift was. And they were able to do this by really understanding the context in which the product was being used. Which brings me to the next concept, design with context. So all of these scenarios that we just discussed are nothing but context. Once you understand where, when, and how, and why your product is being used by your users, light bulb movement happens for majority of the companies, and that's exactly what leads to innovation. All of these scenarios that we just discussed is exactly where Uber is used and is exactly leading you to the ultimate solution that they have for us right now. And that's what changes. So not just that, but through an understanding of context, you can also create delight. And sometimes the solution is very, very simple. I'm sorry to bring up Headspace again, but they do have multiple modules on their application. Two of them is meditate and second is sleep. Just because they're able to understand the context in which both of these modules would be used, meditate, you would usually use it in the morning and the evening time. So the emotion that the UI evokes is more uplifting and more jovial, more energetic. And the sleep module that they have called Sleepcast is more on the warmer side, which essentially tells us that they know when exactly you're going to be using the product. You will basically be using it right before sleep, and the room is going to be dark enough. So you might as well make your user interface more warm and more welcoming, not really hurting the eye. So although you're keeping the UX exactly the same across all of these modules, they have like 5 modules, but a little change in the UI really creates delight and really helps you connect with the application and understand that they actually think about you. And this is how Siri keeps it contextual for me. So if you look at, I've taken 2 screenshots of these Siri suggestions that you get on your phone. I've taken a screenshot morning 8:20 a.m. and the second screenshot is 5:53 p.m. So if you could see, there's a stark difference between the kind of apps that Siri is suggesting me. In the morning, it's suggesting me more of fitness and meditation, like Headspace and Allo Moves. It's suggesting me Basecamp. We basically use Basecamp within our company to manage projects. It's suggesting me YouTube Music because I like my music in the morning. And in the evening time, it's suggesting more of communication tool because there's a lot of meeting and calls happening. So just because it's making it so contextual for me, I feel connected and I feel like the product is actually looking out for me, or it is well connected with my schedule. All right. So that was about designing with context. Next is don't launch in Silicon Valley. And by this, what I mean is most of the products, most of the founders that I meet more often than not are very, very influenced by Silicon Valley. And why not? Because of their technological prowess, the social prowess. There's nothing bad in getting inspired from there. But if you're launching your product in India, your product and your UX cannot be set in Silicon Valley. The mindset and understanding of your target users has to be based in India and not in Silicon Valley. That's exactly what I mean by not launching in Silicon Valley. Because people in India, just for an example, again, comes in various shapes, sizes, color, ethnicity, mindset to people in Silicon Valley or people in any other country. So you should always design like a local, because even within your country, how people behave in Delhi might not exactly be how people behave in Bangalore or Mumbai. And which is why understanding how people coming from different cultures will behave or react to the same triggers. Because once you understand that, you basically are able to communicate more effectively with the people, with your users where you're launching your product. And once you do that, The solution is to localize your communication so that you're able to appeal to the values of that community, appeal to the values of those target audiences. And in turn, your users feel more connected with your piece of communication. Next up is do more than expected. This is one of the biggest lessons that I've learned from my very favorite startup called Airbnb. And what they say is, when you're starting up, it's like the best time for you to handcraft experiences for your users, because if you have 10 users or maybe 15, 20 users in the start, that's when you have a lot of time to have one-on-one conversations with your users and really try to understand in terms of what you can do to make them fall in love with your product. Exactly how I fell in love with Headspace. You're supposed to make your users fall in love with them and not just like your product, because if they just like your product, they're not going to talk about it with their friends and family or recommend you. So what happens when your users love your product is definitely word of mouth, and that leads to scale. This is one of the Airbnb's 11-star framework that they follow. Of course, I'm going to be sharing this with you right after the call, because this is really, really important in terms of designing the experience. So in their context, how they use this is they define like a 5-star experience, and they define it as simple as a guest knocking on the door and the host opens and lets you in. That's like a 5-star experience for them. That means all of their logistics, all of their applications and interactions are working normally. And in the same breath, they also define their 11-star experience, wherein Elon Musk shows up and takes you to the space. Of course, that's just impossible, but it's just a creative exercise which essentially leads you into certain places that you wouldn't have imagined your product can go or your feature can go. And what lies between the 1-star experience to 11-star experience, or between the 5 and 10-star experience, is the sweet spot wherein you can actually differentiate your product in terms of experience. And for them, it's between 6-star to 7-star. So this is quite a fun and creative exercise that you can get in with your team members to really define how you want your users to be experiencing your product. And don't forget the magic that happened with me with Headspace. This just one piece of communication really did magic for me. And since last year to this year, I've been an avid user of Headspace. I've been telling hundreds of people to go experience the application. As a matter of fact, I'm talking about it right now. That's the level of impact you have on people once you design the experience well. So what we talked about is all the core concepts you basically need to develop that design mindset in the first place. We're going pretty strong with covering the topics, although I can't see you. I hope you're all on the same page. And now that we've understood the concepts, now we're ready to add magic, and that's narrative design. And for you to understand what I mean by narrative design, you will need to understand what a typical hero's journey is. So this is like a model that can be applied to any of the movies that you would have watched, or any cartoon shows, or any shows that you're following. A lot of innovative companies use this hero's journey as a model to design experiences for their users, to really see where exactly those touch points are between your interfaces to the users, and how to really define it and how to contextualize it, just to help you understand what a hero's journey is, in case you're not aware about this. So it defines, or it talks about, an ordinary guy in an ordinary world. He gets a call to adventure. That happens in any movie. He crosses that threshold because he has this curiosity inside of him. And on the way, he meets several mentors, helpers, he faces a lot of challenges and temptations, and his older self dies, and he's reborn into this new self where he goes into a transformation and he returns to the ordinary world triumphant, or at least having a transformation experience. To put things in perspective, I'm just going to give you a very practical example of how Airbnb is utilizing the same hero's journey model to define various touch points that they have in their own user's journey. Uh, so they define an ordinary world as the origin where their guest actually starts from, basically using the application. They define crossing the threshold as the arrival point, basically when you're arriving in the airport of the place that you're visiting. You meet several mentors and helpers, as I mentioned. For them, it's hosts. Challenges basically is defined as exploration for them. And more often than not, a lot of travel experiences where you're exploring so many things, you do go through a transformational experience and you return to your ordinary world, which is basically your hometown or your native place, and they define it as departure. So that's exactly how they carve the entire experience of you using the application, to you visiting the host's place, to you experiencing the entire transformation journey. And this model actually helped them launch this amazing feature back in 2016, which was Airbnb Trips, where again a light bulb moment happened with them, where they realized travel is nothing but an ideal movie where this person goes through this entire circle and comes out with a transformation experience. And that's exactly how they were able to wire it in their feature and the platform itself. So basically what we're trying to do over here is really transform your user's emotion. And there's obviously a bit of psychology play here. So what this graph represents is, suppose if you're using this platform or an application for 3 minutes, you do go through several roller coaster of emotions. You could be curious, sometimes you could be attentive, sometimes you could be angry, sad, delighted. Just to give you a more practical example, sorry to bring up Headspace again. This is just an example for you to understand how you can really transform your users when they enter the application and when they exit your application. And this is a gold standard in terms of really giving your users the right experience, the right transformation experience. So imagine if I entered this application stressed. That's my first emotion. You can see several sections on the same application wherein they have this inspiring video of a designer who's in love with the work that he does, and how is he relating everything to the mindfulness concept. That just brings about an inspired emotion in me. The next section talks about the recent few exercises that I went about that makes me more focused. The next section has a featured collection, which is very contextual of the things that's going around. That makes me attentive. The next section has a message that you can share with your friend, but it's not displayed directly on the home screen. That makes me curious to know what's behind it. And the CTA says, check it out. And the last section, which is around a community story, they keep it very short and crisp, but it always gives me a sense of belonging, because you're basically feeling like you're interacting with the same peers or using the same application who have the same mindset. And I exit the application feeling more calmer. So that's how the entire transformation of my emotions is happening by using this application. And this entire model and the structure stays true for any of the application that you're designing, whether if it's a B2B platform or a B2C platform, the concept remains the same. At the end of the day, what you're trying to do is really give your users a transformational experience. Even if it's a landing page, that's exactly what you should be doing. Which now brings me to the last leg where we will be talking about certain principles, certain lessons, and a few blind spots that usually people overlook. We'll be talking about selecting the right weapons for your product and why friction is good. By the right weapons, I actually mean selecting the right UX metrics for your business and your products and how to go about it. And this is very, very essential. Of course, you have a lot of information and data out there on Google on what kind of metrics that are out there that can be useful for you. But I'm not going to talk about the theoretical stuff because there's a lot out there. But I'm going to talk about how to go about selecting the right metrics for you all. So usually there are scenarios in businesses. One of the scenarios could be you're very much focused on the growth metrics and only on the growth metrics. What happens is your design, whatever that you're doing, is only to aggressively improve those numbers. It could be engagements, DAUs, time on the app, and you're basically trying to work on more engagement front rather than working on your foundation. And that's exactly what happens on Netflix. So when of course, most of y'all would be aware of this. As soon as one of the episodes ends, it gives you a CTA, it gives you an option to either exit or stay on the same screen so that it can automatically direct you to the next episode. And in this entire scenario, Netflix just gives you 5 seconds of time to make a decision whether you want to stay on the screen or you want to exit. As a matter of fact, psychology says 5 seconds is not a good enough time for our brains to make that call, and which is why we tend to binge watch whatever that we're watching. The second scenario is where you're deriving metrics from other businesses and industries, basically using a template from someone else and try to fit it together in your own business framework. That usually doesn't work. And what happens is the design is always disconnected from providing value to your users. There's always this disconnect, and you'd never be able to find out where the gap is if you're using a templatized version of your metrics. There's this vicious cycle that most of the products goes through, especially products who do not do well eventually. What happens is initially you're focusing on your core foundation, the users just love what you're doing. You go on to release meaningful features, people are still loving you, and eventually you start to focus more on the growth metrics rather than your foundation. Metrics, it could be like engagement, DAU, average time on the app. Now, I'm not saying growth metrics are wrong or you should not focus on it, but at the same time, you should also not lose sight of your core foundation, basically exactly where your users were loving your features and your product. Because once you do that, you will see a majority chunk of your users falling out eventually. And of course, you go on to create a lot of content around the product. You go about creating podcasts, campaigns, and whatnot. Now, nothing against content production around product, but as long as you're not really losing focus on the core solution that you were supposed to provide to your users, because there's always this vicious cycle that goes on, and a new product comes into the picture and users fall out and start using the new product. So the ultimate solution, of course, is to wire, or in fact, first thing is to understand what your users' personal objectives are. Why exactly, if you have like 100 users, understand why these users are actually using your products in the first place, and then wire your product metrics or even business metrics with those personal objectives that the users have, and then focus on the growth metrics. That will take you very, very long. And I usually recommend people to be like a grocery shopkeeper, because those guys are the ones who are interacting one-on-one with their customers. They exactly know why their customers are using that product or buying that product off the shelf. What do they like about it? What do they not like about it? So constantly being in touch with your users is key when it comes to setting UX metrics for your business. Now, next up is why friction is good. What I mean by this. So when we talk about user journey, you would always hear designers talking about reducing the friction in the user journey and experience, minimizing the number of clicks, because that's how you're able to lead your users faster to either checkouts or buying your service or products. But let me tell you, keeping users informed is always going to be more important than minimizing the number of clicks. Why? Imagine this is you, and suddenly you land on Mars, and you have no freaking idea how you got teleported to Mars, and you'll be like, how did I get here? Why did I get here in the first place? And how do I go back? Hello, is someone there listening to this? So this is exactly how your users feel when you lead them to a strange dialog box that they have no idea about, or if you lead them to a page that they have no idea about how to come back and what is happening in the product. If there's a broken feedback loop, this is exactly, of course, this is a little exaggerated in terms of an example, but this is exactly how people feel when there's a broken feedback loop or they have no idea what is going on in your product. And which is why I'm saying keeping users informed is much, much, much important than reducing the friction or minimizing the number of clicks, because they need to know what is going on, where they exactly are in your user journey. You're supposed to let them know where they are going, and what they need to do or what you want them to do on the product is something that they should be always aware about. One tap and do it all is not always the solution for all the products. So you just need to be cognizant of that. Otherwise, you could lead into serious trouble. I do have an example around it. Suppose you're making a payment of $1,000 to someone, and you by mistake added another zero that makes it 10,000, and the application doesn't really ask you to confirm the number, and boom, your 10,000 rupees gets deducted. And you will be raging, and you will be asking the application why it didn't really give you another dialog box to confirm the number. So that's the level of importance that friction has. That's the level of user feedback loop, or the importance that it has in a product. Of course, I'm giving you an example from a financial product, but keeping users informed is a concept that applies to any of the products that you're designing, and not just financial products here. So yeah, we talked about the last leg of selecting the right weapons and why friction is good. And since it's festive time, I do have some goodies for you guys. Right after our talk, I'm going to be sharing this UX survival kit, which has all the theoretical and interesting stuff, right from the right UX metrics and frameworks, certain heuristics that you can use when you're designing UI, a curated list of blogs that I always go back to, some essential podcasts which are very, very interesting in terms of the topics that they're discussing, video series, and of course my email ID, so that you can just hit me up with any interesting question that you guys have. And yeah, that's it from me.